Hi, this afternoon I went to the cinema and I saw The Strangers Chapter 1, the latest film from the Strangers horror series. The first film was released in 2008, written and directed by Brian Bertino, and it was about a couple who return home late from a wedding after an unsuccessful proposal and find themselves being terrorized by mysterious masked people. It was a lean, stripped down shark of a movie. 75 minutes plus credits, very clean, very straightforward, very menacing, very, very effective, and it's the only film I've seen as an adult that led me to sleep with the light on, even though I'd watched it in the middle of the afternoon. 10 years later, The Strangers Pray at Night was released, a sequel directed by Johannes Roberts from a story by Bertino, with the killers this time targeting a family visiting an abandoned trailer park. It didn't have the simplicity and the leanness of the first film. It had, instead, with Roberts adding a certain level of style, which sometimes worked in terms of some effective visuals, and sometimes detracted from the straightforward uh, cleanness of the premise, adding some effective set pieces and an 80s pop score, which I think pulled away from the horror, and also a John Carpenter light soundtrack, which felt somewhat derivative. So, another 6 years later, we have The Strangers Chapter 1, directed by Renny Harlin, once director of A-list movies like Cliffhanger and Cutthroat Island, now reduced to crap like this. It's supposed to be the first in a trilogy of Strangers films shot simultaneously in Eastern Europe. The second film is due for release later this year, the third early in 2025. But it's really just a retread of the first film. We have a couple that staying in a house in the middle of nowhere. This time it's during a road trip across Oregon. But they are two of the most loathsome, obnoxious, unpleasant individuals I've ever seen leading a movie. I hated them almost immediately, and their dialogue is terrible. A lot of the film is just rehashing the first, but badly. There is an almost bizarrely awful attempt at suspense all the way through. Instead, there are just jump scares. There are numerous just generic horror elements and slasher movie tropes. There's not only nothing original here, but it takes a film that was simple and clean and fucks the whole thing up. It's an incredibly badly directed, badly written film, and I was really shocked by how sloppy it was. Um, One particular element that stood out is of the three killers. One is credited on the first two as simply the man in the mask who never speaks. In this film, he's credited as Scarecrow, given the mask is appropriate, but they cast a very heavily built actor in the role rather than the lean average build of the first two films. The whole point being that they could be anybody, that they are nobody. They are perfectly normal looking people who happen to be wearing masks and terrorizing people in the middle of the night for no reason. But now we have one that looks like Jason because this is made by someone who has no idea what they're doing. It's it's so badly thought out. It seems to be just a ridiculous attempt to try and squeeze more mileage out of the Strangers concept, but there's really nowhere else it can go. Roberts had the idea of expanding it out, adding a few more characters, setting it in a wider area, but still keeping it contained, keeping it focused. And as a result, that actually worked on its own way very well. It's not as good as the first film in losing that simplicity, but it still works as an effective thriller in its own right. Um, this doesn't in any way. It's a feeble-minded photocopy of an excellent thriller. Um, One could joke that it has a bloated running time, in that it is 6 minutes longer than either of the previous movies, running a massive hour and 31 minutes. But it really makes you feel those extra 6 minutes. It ends with a to be continued caption, almost as a threat. And strangely, the end credits seem to list the cast of the entire trilogy because about a third of the actors credited, or certainly the characters credited, aren't in this film. This may be the only film I've ever seen where the number of producers outnumbers the cast, and it really demonstrates how cynical and how small-minded a production this was. This is an attempt purely to milk more cash out of a franchise that had nowhere else to go. And as a result, it's embarrassing, it's craven, it's entirely incompetent. I'm shocked that Renny Harlin is still getting work when he's this bad a director. And there is essentially nothing to recommend this film in any way. I would recommend the two previous films, The Strangers and The Strangers Pray at Night. They're both fine thrillers, very scary and very effective in their own right. This is shit.